If you want to sound more natural, professional, and confident at work, then this video is for you. Today I'm sharing 50 common business idioms and expressions that you need to know if you're working in an English-speaking environment. I've got 5 categories of phrases to share with you today, and for each one I'll explain what it means, how to use it, and give an example sentence. So if you're ready, let's get started. Our first set of phrases are used for business meetings and discussions. If you're in a meeting, these phrases can help you sound more professional and engaged in the conversation. First, we have to take the floor. This phrase means to begin speaking in a formal setting, usually a meeting, a debate, or a presentation. This phrase is often used if the speaker is presenting something and suggests that they have the attention of everybody and they are leading the discussion. Here's an example of how you could use that in a sentence. After the CEO finished her introduction, David took the floor to present the quarterly sales report. He took the floor, which means he started to speak and he had everyone's attention. The next phrase is a show of hands. If you ask for a show of hands in a meeting, you're using it to understand how many people support something or are in favor of something. It could also be used to indicate interest or approval. It's often used in meetings to make quick decisions. If you ask for a show of hands, you can very quickly see how many people agree or are interested in the proposal, just judging by how many people have their hand in the air. Here's an example of how you could use it in a sentence. Let's do a show of hands. Who's in favor of the new policy? The next phrase is to call the shots. If you call the shots, it means you are in charge and making the key decisions. It's often used for managers or maybe team leaders of a group. Here's an example of how to use it. As the project manager, Mary calls the shots on budget allocations and deadlines. The next phrase is to cut to the chase. If you cut to the chase, it means you go directly to the point. You don't waste time giving background information, you get straight down to business. In a meeting, you could say, I know there's a lot of details to go over, but we've got limited time right now, so let's cut to the chase. The next phrase is get the ball rolling. To get the ball rolling means to start an activity, a project, or a discussion. You usually use this phrase when you want to initiate some momentum, which can get everyone motivated to begin. For example, you might walk into a meeting and say, okay, let's get the ball rolling. Where are we with? And then you might ask someone for an update on a particular project. So in this example, you got the ball rolling by starting the meeting, but you could also use it for a project. For example, you might say, let's get the ball rolling with our new marketing project, meaning you're going to start that project. Let's get the ball rolling. The next phrase is on the same page. If you are on the same page as someone, it means you have the same ideas or you agree on a particular way to do something. This is often very important when you're working as a team. In a meeting, you might say, before we finalize our sales strategy, let's make sure we're all on the same page. This means you want to make sure that everyone agrees with the proposed strategy before you begin. The next phrase is a ballpark figure, and this is used when you want to get an approximate estimate of something. Often when you're talking about finances or numerical data. This suggests a rough idea rather than an exact or precise number. For example, you might say, I don't need to know the exact amount, but can you just give me a ballpark figure on how much we're spending on the event? This means you're asking the person to give you an approximation, an estimation of how much it's going to cost. The next phrase is to raise the bar. If you raise the bar, it means you set your expectations or standards even higher than they currently are. Often, this is used when you're talking about performance or quality. For example, you might say, our competitors just launched an innovative new product, so we really need to raise the bar with our next product release. This means that you're going to improve your product, make it even better, increase the quality. The next phrase is to play devil's advocate. If you play devil's advocate, it means you argue against an idea, you give an alternative point of view. This isn't necessarily because you disagree, it's because you want to test the strength of the idea by offering an alternative viewpoint. For example, if a team member gives an idea in a meeting, you might say, just to play devil's advocate, what about if we look at it from this perspective? So in that way, you're not really disagreeing with the idea, but you're showing how you might argue against it, just to test how strong of an idea that is. The final phrase in this category is in the loop. If you're in the loop, it means you are informed or you're up to date on the progress of something. This is often used when you're working in a team on a project and there's lots of people doing different things. If you stay in the loop, it means you want everyone to update you on what they're doing so that you always know what's going on. For example, you might say to your team members in the meeting, please make sure you keep me in the loop if there are any changes to the marketing strategy. The next group of phrases can be used during negotiations. These idioms are all about those situations where you're negotiating or trying to sound persuasive. The first one is to drive a hard bargain. This means you negotiate aggressively or persistently to try and get the best possible outcome for yourself. It's often used to describe people who are skilled at negotiating. For example, this client is known to drive a hard bargain, so expect a difficult negotiation. This means that the person you're going to negotiate with is tough, and it will be quite hard to negotiate with them, so you better be prepared. The next phrase is give and take. When we talk about give and take, we're referring to the process of having mutual compromises. So each party might have to make some concessions in order to reach an agreement. For example, successful negotiations often involve a bit of give and take. No one gets everything they want. It means that both sides have to make compromises. The next phrase is to go the extra mile. If you go the extra mile, it means you put in additional effort beyond what is expected. You work extra hard on something in order to really deliver a successful outcome. For example, if we go the extra mile with our customer support, we can achieve long-term loyalty. The next phrase is a win-win situation. If you achieve a win-win situation, it means that everyone has some kind of benefit from the decision. For example, if we offer a small discount, the client saves some money, but we still make a profit. It's a win-win situation. This means the client wins because they get the discount, we win because we make the profit. Everyone benefits from the situation. The next phrase is to bend over backwards. If you bend over backwards, it means that you're making a great effort or even a sacrifice to do something, usually to help someone. It usually involves putting in a lot of effort, working very hard to try and make someone happy or achieve a goal. For example, we bent over backwards to meet the customer's demands, but they still weren't satisfied. The next phrase is to seal the deal. This means to finalize an agreement, contract, or negotiation successfully. If you seal the deal, it means that everyone has agreed. For example, you might say, offering a free trial of our product was the final step to seal the deal with the client, meaning that you offered this free trial and that made the client agree to the contract, agreement, or negotiation. The next thing you might need to do during a negotiation is to read between the lines. If you read between the lines, it means you need to infer implied meaning or understand something that's not actually being said by the other person. If you have a skill for reading between the lines, it can make you a very successful negotiator. For example, the meeting seemed to go well, but reading between the lines, I could sense some hesitation. This means that even though it seemed like the meeting had been successful, you could tell that the other person wasn't quite sure. They were hesitating. The next phrase is to play your cards right. Also important during a negotiation, because this means that you are making the right decisions in order to maximize your chance of success. For example, you might say, if you play your cards right during the interview, you might be able to negotiate for a higher salary. Another card-related idiom is to hold all the cards. If you hold all the cards in a situation, it means you have an advantage over the other person. This is particularly relevant in negotiations, and it suggests that you have the stronger position. For example, since we are the sole supplier, we hold all the cards in price negotiations. This means that you're coming from a very strong place to negotiate a price. And the final phrase in this category is to go back to the drawing board. If you go back to the drawing board, it means you start all over again. You go back to the beginning, usually after a plan or negotiation failed. For example, our advertising strategy didn't work, so it's back to the drawing board, meaning we have to start again with a new idea. If you're enjoying this video, then please help me out by taking a second to click the like button and subscribe to my channel. It really does help me to grow and bring you more videos every single week. Thank you so much everyone for all your support, and now let's get back to the video with our third category. The next group of phrases and idioms can be used for business emails and communication. If you want to make your communication at work sound more natural, have a go at using some of these phrases. The first one is to touch base. This means to briefly connect with someone, often used for a quick update or a very quick catch-up meeting. It's usually used during projects to discuss the progress of something. For example, you might send an email to your coworker and say, "Let's touch base next week to review the campaign results." This means you want to have a very quick catch-up meeting to see how you're doing in a project. The next one is keep me posted. If you ask someone to keep you posted, it means you want to stay updated, usually for an ongoing situation where there might be new developments. For example, "I'll be out of the office tomorrow, but keep me posted on any urgent issues." This means you want to be updated if anything comes up. The next phrase is to drop the ball. If you drop the ball, it means you make a mistake, especially if you've forgotten to complete a task or fulfill a responsibility. For example, you might say, "I was supposed to follow up with the client yesterday, but I completely forgot. I really dropped the ball." The next phrase is to put something on hold. If you put something on hold, it means you've temporarily delayed or paused a decision or a project. For example, you might need to let your team know that you're pausing a particular project, and you could write in an email, "Due to budget constraints, we've decided to put this project on hold for the time being." It just means that you've paused it and you'll come back to it later. The next phrase is to hit the nail on the head. If you hit the nail on the head, it means that you are completely and absolutely right about something. This is a nice one to say when communicating with your colleagues and you want to say that they really got something right. For example, you might say, "Your analysis really hit the nail on the head." In a way, you're complimenting your colleague here because they got something really right. They hit the nail on the head. The next phrase is to pull some strings. If you do this, it means that you're using your connections to achieve a desired outcome, often in the background. For example, you might say, "I had to pull some strings, but I managed to get a last-minute meeting with the director of the company." This suggests that it was a little bit difficult to do, but you used your connections or some people that you know in order to make it happen. You got that meeting because you pulled some strings. The next phrase is to think outside the box. This is often used in discussion when you're brainstorming ideas, and it means to think creatively or to think of ideas that are not conventional. In a brainstorming session, you might say to your colleagues, "Our traditional advertising methods are not working. We need to think outside the box in order to increase revenue." You're going to think creatively and think of innovative new ideas. The next phrase is to go hand in hand. This is when you're talking about two things that naturally complement each other or are very closely related. This could be used in a variety of contexts, but an example of how you might use it in a sentence could be, "Strong leadership and communication go hand in hand." This means that they complement each other, they're closely related. A strong leader needs to have good communication. The next phrase in this category is to keep it short and sweet. This means that you're making a message concise but effective, particularly in an email, when giving a presentation, or communicating a message. For example, the report was short and sweet. It got the main points across very effectively. This means that the report wasn't very long, but it still was effective. The next group of phrases could be used when talking about workplace challenges and problem solving. If you've got a challenge at work, maybe using one of these idioms will help. The first one is a tough nut to crack. This means that you have a difficult problem, situation, or person that might require some effort or strategy to deal with effectively. For example, you might say, convincing senior management to go with this budget will be a tough nut to crack. That means you'll have a difficult job on your hands trying to convince them to approve your budget. The next idiom is to take something with a grain of salt, or you could say with a pinch of salt. This means that you are skeptical about something rather than simply accepting it. It's often used when you don't necessarily believe something or someone, or if you advise someone not to pay too much attention to something. For example, you might say, his sales projections seem optimistic. I'd take them with a pinch of salt. Meaning, don't pay too much attention to them because I'm skeptical about this. The next phrase is the bottom line, which is the most important or essential aspect of something. Usually this is related to finances. You often use this in communication where you want to be quite direct about something. For example, you might say, the bottom line is that we need to cut costs now or we risk going over budget. The next phrase is a blessing in disguise. This is used to refer to something that might seem negative at first, but actually turns out to be a good thing. So it's often used in times where there at first seems to be a problem, but actually it turns out to be good. For example, the software going out of business was actually a blessing in disguise because it allowed us to move on to a higher performing software. At first it seemed negative, but actually turned out to be positive. The next phrase is to jump the gun, which means to act too soon or to make a premature decision about something, often without having sufficient information. For example, we shouldn't launch our new product just yet. Let's not jump the gun before testing is complete. The next phrase is to put out fires. When you're putting out fires, it means you're dealing with often unexpected and urgent problems. Usually these problems require your immediate attention and can often lead to quite a stressful situation. For example, my job as a manager often involves putting out fires and handling last-minute crises. The next phrase is to throw in the towel, and this means to give up. This is often used after repeated failures or difficulties when you finally decide to give up or to throw in the towel. For example, you might say, after 3 failed attempts to secure funding, the company has finally decided to throw in the towel. The next phrase is to hit a snag. This is when you encounter an unexpected problem. You might say, we were making good progress on the project, but then we hit a snag when the supplier didn't deliver. This means that things were going well, but suddenly you came across an unexpected obstacle during your project. The next phrase is under the table. If something is done under the table, it means it's done secretly or even illegally. Often this is used for financial transactions. For example, you could say the company was fined for making payments under the table. This means they made some illegal transactions which caused them to be punished with a fine. It was under the table, it was secret, it was illegal. And the final phrase here to talk about problems at work is against the clock. If you're working against the clock, it means you don't have much time to do something. Often it means that you're working to a strict deadline and there might be quite a lot of pressure put on you. For example, you might say, I'm working against the clock to submit the proposal before the deadline. Our final category of phrases can be used when talking about leadership or success. They can often be used to describe people who lead or successful situations at work. The first one is the big picture. When you talk about the big picture at work, you're talking about the overall perspective or the long-term success of a company. Rather than focusing on minor details, it's usually important for the managing director of a company to think about the big picture, and that's usually part of their job. You might say, for example, during a meeting, instead of worrying about small details, let's focus on the big picture here. The next phrase is a game changer. Game changer is a revolutionary idea or innovation that can significantly alter things in a positive way. For example, you might say, remote work has been a game changer for startup companies. It allows people to work from home and save on office costs while still being an efficient team. It's a game changer. It's changed things for the better. The next phrase is to climb the corporate ladder. This means to progress or advance in a particular company or professional field, usually referring to business or corporate settings. For example, she started as an intern and quickly climbed the corporate ladder to become manager of the company. The next phrase is to be in the driver's seat. This means that you are in charge or in control of a situation. It means that you are making the decisions. It's often referred to people who are leading a team and they are in charge. So if you think of a project or a team at work that you've got going on, you might say, this person is in the driver's seat. It means they're in charge. They are leading the team and they make the decisions. The next phrase is to think on your feet. If you think on your feet, it means you can think quickly in a situation, often used talking about being under pressure. For example, during the Q&A session, he had to think on his feet so he could answer tough questions. It means that he was thinking quickly, he was under pressure, and he was able to produce answers to these difficult questions. The next phrase is the elephant in the room. This is used to talk about a big problem or a situation that everyone knows about, but they're avoiding talking about it. You might say, no one wants to mention the elephant in the room, our declining sales and upcoming redundancies. It's a big problem, everyone's aware, but no one wants to talk about it. The next phrase is throw someone under the bus. This is a not very nice thing to do because it means to betray someone or blame someone for something in order to save yourself or to shift responsibility to another person so that you don't get into trouble. For example, you might say, when the project failed, he threw his assistant under the bus instead of taking responsibility. The next phrase is to call it a day. This is when you decide to stop working, usually on a specific task, often used when you're talking about finishing work and going home. I'm going to call it a day now. I've been working on this task for hours, it's now time to finish so that I can leave. The next phrase is to lead by example. This means that you demonstrate the behavior or the work ethic that you want everyone else to have. You are showing what you expect from other people by being a model of those behaviors or values. You might say, good leaders lead by example. They don't just give orders. The next phrase is to stay ahead of the curve. This means that you are being proactive and innovative and you're keeping up with trends in your industry. A very important thing to do in today's world. Everything's moving so quickly, new innovations coming out all the time. It's important to stay ahead of the curve in order to be successful. And speaking of innovation and being successful, the next phrase is cutting edge, often used with the word technology, cutting edge technology. This refers to the latest, the most advanced or highly developed products in an industry. You might say, our company stays competitive by using cutting edge technology. And there you have it. You just learned 50 really common phrases that you can use in a business or professional English setting. Let me know how you get on with those by dropping a comment down below. And if you're looking for more vocabulary that you can use at work, then I recommend you watch this video next, where I share 50 common phrasal verbs to use in a business English setting. See you there.